Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sandner from Pembroke Publishers. And just before we get started, I would like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. And the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. And I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. Well, I would like to again welcome everyone for joining us this evening. We see, thank you, Tiffany, for saying hello. We always say the Pembroke Gold Star for the first person that just came in and said hello. So it's great to see you. It's been a while since our paths have crossed. I think it was pre-COVID, so it's really nice to see you joining us this evening. I know there's others in the internet or in the web ether in tonight as well. So we'll get started here. As I said, my name is Lionel Sandner, and traditionally I am, over the last 3 years, have been the host of all the Pembroke Publisher webinars with our various authors from our various books. And it's been an absolute pleasure to meet so many people that have worked so hard and are passionate about education and what the topics are related to their book. Today's a little bit different because I get to introduce my co-author, a colleague, friend, hard worker, a little bit of everything, language teacher, Sandra Mirabelli, who is, depending on how positioned on the screens, is probably right below me at this particular time. Sandra and I have worked together 10, 12 years, starting when she was the literacy consultant in Dufferin Peel. And in that time, we have covered a lot of territory around anything to do with science, literacy, kind of in the middle school, and intermediate range within Dufferin Peel, working with the teachers in the board for 7 or 8 years on a variety of different programs that are showing ways to integrate science and literacy. And all during that time, well, mostly to Sandra, not to me, they would say, the teacher would say, you should write a book. And we just did. She was just too busy in that time doing her master's, teaching, working at the provincial level, working with the Council of Ministers of Education on various assessments. And I was busy running my publishing company that it wasn't going to happen. But then COVID came along and we had some time, and there's a few things that sort of, I guess, got us going on. And before I know it, we were starting to write a book. And when Sandra got going, I couldn't say no because she was working so hard and writing all this. And I was like, okay, this thing's actually going to happen. So, it is an honor to have worked with you and known you for all these years, Sandra, and it's really nice to introduce you and have you here today. So welcome. It's great to have you here as a Pembroke author now, and I think it's time for us to get going.
That sounds great, Lionel. Thanks so much. Oh my gosh, that was a really nice introduction.
Yeah, I can say nice things once in a while, right? So
right. I have all the same ones to say back to you.
Yeah, that's great.
We'll start now.
Good. So as folks are saying hello in the chat, and our book coming out is called Fail-Safe Strategies for Science and Literacy. And what we tried to do is combine the best of both. We think and we hope that over the next half an hour to 45 minutes, we can show you some very practical ways and almost, if you like, logical ways of bringing in science into your literacy time, but also bringing literacy into your science time. And it's that blending that we think is just a natural fit. And when you get into our book, you'll note that we have 25 different strategies with 25 science activities. And each of those science activities comes with a very short 2.5 minute video clip. And we thought that maybe we would start with just one of the video clips to give you a sense of what's accessible through QR codes and our YouTube channel. Do this one for a reason. We call it Egg in a Cup. You may have seen it before, and those of you that have been with us have definitely seen it, because it tends to be the first science demonstration or science demo that we do. It was the very first one I did, my very first day of teaching, and it was still, to this day, I get excited about doing it, because it's just, there's a little bit of intellectual risk. There's a chance of things not quite working every single time you do it, and yet it always seems to work. So with that, I'm just going to start us with a little video called Egg in a Cup, just to give you kind of a sense of what our videos look like, as a way of, as you're reading through and seeing how you could do this particular activity in the context of language arts. This activity is called Egg in a Cup, and it might be my most favorite activity because it's the very first one I did when I started teaching. For this activity, you're going to need a coffee cup and fill it half full of water. If you're an optimist, and if you're a pessimist, then it's half empty. You need a cookie sheet, and the only key thing with the cookie sheet is that it has a flat bottom with no lip. You have a spool of thread and an egg. Now you take those materials, and now we're going to build a structure with that. We're going to put the cup on the bottom, cookie sheet on top of the cup, and then a spool of thread and our egg. And then we're going to slide the whole structure close to the edge so that the cookie sheet just pokes out over the top. Then we're going to take this corn broom that we have here, and the key with the corn broom is it has a wooden handle, and we're going to step on the corn broom part and be able to pull it back and let go. And ideally, what we want to have happen is that the handle hits the cookie sheet just before it hits the edge. And that's going to be our demo. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we get going. I always find that activity exciting, and the kids always get excited about it. And it's kids of all ages, because the question is, where is the egg? And if we look into the cup, many of them have seen it, but they still don't believe it. But then you bring out the egg, and there you go. So it's egg in a cup. And the egg fell into the cup because we applied a force to the cookie sheet that pushed the cookie sheet away, and the spool of thread came with it. But Newton's first law said things that keep one to keep doing what they're doing. And in this case, the egg was just sitting there, if you like, and when the support was taken away, gravity pulled it into the cup. So Egg in a Cup, it's a great demo to start with. It gets kids to make predictions, and it allows you to demonstrate a little bit about taking some intellectual risks in the name of science. And then once you're done, we can give it a little bit of a clean up as well, because there might be a little bit of water. I have to say, Sandra, that usually when we do that one, when the egg goes in the cup, everyone claps. But when you're
almost going to do that and say, I've watched it 25 times and I still clap.
Exactly. So that's an example of a video that we would be one of the 25 that we have with our program, just enough to show you what to do and what to expect, and so you're not kind of going in cold the first time you try it, probably before you might bring it into the classroom. So, oh yeah, that's right. There is they've done an update, and if you notice on your screen, you do have the ability to add claps and various things, different kinds of emojis. So thanks to those of you that clap there. That's great. So we'll go into a little more detail in a few minutes before about how this activity has support wrapped around it so that you can take this particular kind of activity into either your science or language arts time. But first, we just kind of like to backtrack a little bit and kind of how did we get here after with all of this? And so there's kind of three threads that got us to building this book, Fail-Safe Strategies. And one of them, those of you, and I recognize a few names from the Dufferin Peel board, will recognize that these myths, somewhere in your time with us, probably had to sit through one of my rants of what was driving me kind of crazy at that particular moment, around various myths that seem to be making its way around. So that's something that both Sandra and I really try to make sure that we identify, and that in our work we try to make sure we address those so that people to go, okay, wait a minute, maybe that's not quite the way that we think that everything works. And so things like learning styles, that they aren't what they don't exist, that children really aren't digital natives and think differently. And we'll talk a bit more about that one in the next slide. The idea that kids can multitask, that knowledge is no longer important because, hey, you can just look it up on Google, that you learn to solve problems by solving problems, and that discovery learning is the best way to learn. These myths have sort of bled into our system from time to time, and we try to find ways within our activities and how we demonstrate our teaching to show that, in fact, those aren't the case. And so that is one piece of our thinking that sort of fed into building our program. The other one has been a career curiosity of just how the brain works. And when I first started teaching in the late 80s, I started reading about a work called cognitive load theory, which was focused in on working memory and how the working memory can only hold probably 4 new chunks of information. At the time, they said that this is great stuff, but you can't do anything with it for education. And when COVID started, and I actually had some time to read, and I've been following it up to them, but then I really went a little bit deeper and realized, holy smokes, they've come to a spot now where they being the researchers, make some pretty strong evidence-based statements of how we learn and how that's connected back to the brain. And we found that very exciting. And we wrote a chapter on that as kind of a precursor to where we would like to continue our writing about how do we use that evidence in coming from cognitive science to help us inform our practice and make better decisions on what the learning should be. In effect, building a learning-centered classroom. And that's different than a teacher-centered or a learner-centered, but a learning-centered. And just for our purposes today, when we look at what we call this information processing model, we see that information comes in from our senses, what we would call our sensory memory. We have to focus and select it, and the importance of attention at this point. And we cannot stress this enough, that in everything that we do, whether it's in science or language arts or any other course for that matter, what is selected is based on what we pay attention to. And so it's what we pay attention to that gets put into our working memory, which is very short term. And we have very little time to take that information and integrate it into our long-term memory, which is limitless. Apparently limitless. We've found no information otherwise to that point. And so those pieces all start to play a part into how we started to design our thinking routines and our strategies. And we would like to build on this further as we go on, because there's more and more information coming out about what are good ways to support students in learning, and the importance of having a strong content or a strong background knowledge base to be able to move forward to eventually solve those problems. Because to solve a problem, you need a very deep content base. It doesn't just come naturally. So that's another piece that fed into our conversation. And then working with our teachers over the 7 or 8 years, we build what we called is a STEML program. So it's science, technology, engineering, math, and then the L is for literacy. And we think that that is just a natural fit. And we call it STEML. We don't really come across anyone. There's lots of other letters thrown in there. But for us, it's just a natural fit. And in chapter 1, we go into a fair amount of detail of why we think that's the case. What are the benefits of integrating both the science and the literacy? And you can see there, it's a bit tight, and I just tried to pick out a few of them, but how the integrated approach has many efficiencies, reduces duplication. You're able to use language arts time to help build student background knowledge about the natural world, which by definition is science. Science and literacy both being concerned about studying, and here's the key one, I think, communicating our understanding of the world. That's, to me, there's a powerful piece there that we're trying to, in our language arts classes, having our kids communicate. What better than communicate about the world around them? And that's where those natural overlaps come. So we see many benefits, and really over the next 20-25 minutes, what we're talking about and our thinking routines and our strategies are really our tools for integrating these two particular subject areas. So with that, as kind of our sort of give you a little bit of sense of some of the areas that came to feed into our book, I'll pass it over to Sandra, and she's going to talk a little bit about thinking routines, which is kind of our, if you like, our big picture organizing. So Sandra?
Okay, thanks, Lionel. So Lionel talked a fair bit about, or really pointed out for us in the information processing model, how attention is so important. And we all know that in our classrooms, right? Getting and keeping our students' attention is critical to, and the first step before they'll do anything else with any of the information that we're working with. The other piece that we also found important is the piece around the working memory and how much can be stored in the working memory, because so little can be stored and it's just there for a short time. So we talked a lot about what are some of the skills that maybe we could automate so that they actually are part of students' long-term memory and don't clog up the working memory and leave some space in that working memory for them to handle more complex ideas. And so each time that we talked about the automation, we kept coming back to the intersection between science and literacy and the skills that are present in both and that are important in both. And so what we tried to do as kind of our overarching schema for organizing the book was capture those skills that are common to both science and literacy as procedural skills, things that can be automated and that students eventually would become so familiar with that they just kind of automatically go into knowing that, oh, the first thing I should do is observe and wonder. And then what do I do with those observations? I might make predictions, I might make some inferences. And those observations really are the starting point of everything, because then I may want to look at, how can I sort these observations or sort data and create categories so that then I can find patterns within it so that I can interpret what's happening. And so you can see that the thinking skills and thinking, we've paired them so they become thinking routines, actually flow into kind of a systematic way to go through looking at a phenomenon or a situation in science. But the book really is a starting point for us and for teachers in their classrooms to just think about even each of the thinking routines separately as one and work on each one for a bit of time as your students become more comfortable. And so tonight we thought we'd take a look at the first thinking routine and just give you a really good sense of that one, because the others are formatted in very similar way in terms of all the supports that we've embedded within the book to support it. So The first thing is there's a lot of teacher resources that provide background knowledge around a particular thinking routine. So for the observe and wonder, as with the others, you'll find a chart that goes through and identifies in specific ways what does it mean to observe, what does it mean to wonder, why are these skills important, how are they connected, so that you could see why we put them in these particular pairs, and then some of the research that supports these two skills. And then there's a number of student-friendly organizers to support kids developing the skill, for example, here of observing and wondering. So we usually start off with some kind of introductory activity. And we thought, since we're virtual with you, we couldn't do the introductory activity with you that's in the book, but we'll talk about it in a moment. But we put up this poll and just have you consider whether the observations that are included at the bottom of the slide actually do help you identify which of the potatoes it is referring to. So we'll give you a minute just to read over the observations and narrow down your choices. And when you're ready, if you can vote.
So, Sandra, just to confirm that people seem to be starting to find the poll, but the idea is that I read what's there and then try to pick out the potato from the line.
From the description, yeah.
Which one's going to become the French fry?
Hey.
Yeah, we got a few people coming in there now. That's great.
Yeah. So far, it's a tie between 2 and 3. Now, one of the things that we really emphasize, and when I was in the classroom that we worked with in terms of helping our students recognize the power of a good observation, is that if the observations are good, someone else should be able to come into that same situation and make the same observations.
I guess too here with this one, we don't have a measurement tool, so that could be potentially if the kids I suspect would use that one quite a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, they
Yeah.
use a measuring tape to verify the measurements that are given. We have 55% that think it's B or number 2. And 45% now think it's number 3. So the observations were good enough to have you narrow it down to the 2 that are almost heart-shaped and that they taper at the end.
I'm going to close the poll now, Sandra.
Okay. Okay, great. So those are the 2 most logical choices based on those observations. I purposely left out color here just so that you'd work with some of the other observations that were there. And if I had put color and you could verify with measuring tools, it would have been number 3, the red one. Now, in the book itself, the introductory activity that you could do maybe the first week of school in September is what we call the missing potato report. So the idea is to have students choose a potato from a pile, make a number of observations about the potato, and you can put out all sorts of measuring tools. I learned very quickly in my class, don't put out a scale though, because they just take their potatoes and put them on the scale and try to identify potatoes based on the mass of the potato. But you can see here that students get quite creative with reports. So the idea is they write a report about their potato because their potato is going to go missing. I'm going to collect all of them and put them back in a pile. And so after all the reports are written, I redistribute the reports to a different student so that no one gets their own. And they go to the pile or piles of potatoes and they try to use this missing potato report to identify the potato that was described. So you can see here in this student sample, they've named their potato Ben, and they last saw him in the cafeteria, which I think is Lionel's little reference to the French fries. And they're very concerned because it's cold and they want Ben back in our classroom, 204. So we have to help them find Ben. And as I was saying, by not placing the scale, that just adds a little bit more rigor to the activity so that students use the other descriptions rather than the scale to just weigh the potato. But students have a lot of fun with this one. And also in this section on the thinking routine of observing and wondering, we provide the anchor chart that helps students with what they need to do when they're making good observations. And that was kind of a big aha moment for us as we were working with our teachers in the science literacy networks. I remember talking to our teachers, and we all kind of agreed that we've never really focused in on teaching kids exactly what an observation was and how do you make it. And so when this anchor chart went up, and we have the original anchor chart there, that's the one that hung up in my classroom, it really was an aha moment for a lot of us. And it actually became a little bit of an internet sensation because so many teachers took photos of it and posted it on Twitter at the time and other social media areas that it was the #1 hit whenever you typed in making good observations on the internet. But it really reinforces that idea around removing some of the things that kids have to hold in their working memory, like all of the points here about what it is to make a good observation so that they can focus in on other points. So they can refer to these points, but they don't have to have them in their memory at the same time that they're looking at their potato and trying to make all these observations.
And
So,
Sandra,
go ahead, Lionel.
I was just going to add to that as kind of the science nerd that joined the group. I just fell in love with anchor charts. And again, senior physics teacher, we don't do a lot of anchor charts then, right? I don't know why, because they're great, right? The number of times that, as you just said a moment ago, someone says, well, what is an observation? And you go, holy smokes, right? Like, and you know it. I mean, we all went to university. We're smart people. We know it, but it's like, could I pull it out? You know, those things that I need right away. And yet when the anchor chart's there, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. It's just that quick reminder, right? And instead of my working memory getting plugged up with, I don't know what it is, I'm going to actually focus on the task you gave me. So I'm a convert. I was a huge fan when you started bringing those out. So
very cool. And I just thought it was my primary printing. Look at that. And so each of the thinking routines actually have an anchor chart. And those were kind of developed when I went back into the classroom during the pandemic. And as a result of all the conversations that we had with our science literacy teachers and between Lionel and I. Some other things that we've added to the thinking routine supports are things like an assessment tool for each of the thinking routines. So the assessment tool can be used for self-reflection by the students so that they can check, and it's very closely tied to the anchor chart so that there is that cohesion between the two and we're not asking them things other than what we've taught. But it also gets them to think about the activity they've just taken part in and extend their thinking in some way and reflect on why that skill is important to develop or how that particular activity helps them think a little bit more deeply about how to approach a phenomenon or a problem in science. And in terms of this thinking routine, the other half of it is the wondering or the asking good questions. And so when you get to the strategy pages, there's a number of strategies that support asking good questions and wondering. And so here we've just pulled a few of the different student-friendly organizers that will help students with developing that skill of asking questions. things that are very familiar in literacy, like the cue chart or the question answer relationship that helps us decide where to look when we're looking for an answer to a particular question. And then things that are very specific to science, like the question sorter, which Lionel and I developed as we were working in the science literacy networks to really distinguish between a researchable question versus a testable question. And then those why questions that are just kind of those philosophical, ponderable ones that we could spend a lot of time just discussing. And so then the second half of the book really is in support of the thinking routines. And what you will find there are 5 strategies for each of the thinking routines, so that in total you'll have 25 literacy strategies that support 25 different science activities. And so you'll really see how you'll see in the visual on the screen, actually, the thinking, the questioning, and the exploring from a literacy lens helps us build knowledge, content knowledge, and vocabulary in science. And just to end off before I turn it back to Lionel to go through a strategy, a lot of the research and a lot of the focus right now is really on the importance of students having a good vocabulary base and a lot of background knowledge that they can pull from when they're studying in any subject, really, or when they're experiencing anything. Those are the 2 biggest determinants of comprehension, not only in reading, but just in terms of making sense of phenomenon and understanding. So I'll turn it over to Lionel now.
Good. Great. Thanks, Sandra. As Sandra said, there are 25 strategies, 5 for each thinking routine, that are in what we would call part 2 of our book. And so we're just going to walk you through one to give you a little bit of a sense of what's there, and then know that there's another 24 for you to explore and try. And because they fit under each of the 5 thinking routines, you may find that these are just things that you can do to work on a particular thinking routine. It might not be a tight fit to your curriculum because science is a topic-based curriculum, but language arts is more skill-based, and so it'll be a nice fit. You're just using some science in there, which is cool at any time to be able to do that. So when you start in part 2, we just have a very quick, I think it's 3-4 pages, where we do a quick summary of each activity. And so in this case, our activity 14 we call static action is, you can see kind of in the first column there is on page 107. The activities on page 107, but there is a literacy strategy in that second column that we're going to take a look at and go into a little bit of detail of what it is, called the visual word sort, and to talk about the purpose of it. As Sandra was talking about, some of the things that we know kids need with any sort of building their literacy skills, the activating prior knowledge, becoming familiar with vocabulary, and revisiting that vocabulary to start to hopefully solidify some of the new terms they might be learning. And that the science activity in the third column is talking a little bit about static charge. And in this particular activity, we're going to be using a balloon and some gelatin, just kind of do a quick little fun little activity there. So you can, at a glance, take very quickly look at, oh, that might work for my language arts class tomorrow, or, oh, I'm doing something on electricity and I could take that and build that into my language arts time or my science time, however it works. Each strategy then, when you get to it, has 4 parts before you get to the science activity. There's just a little bit of an overview of the actual activity. There is an explanation of how you could do some of this activity during your science time, and then an explanation of some of it, how it could be done during your language time. And as Sandra said, at the start of COVID, she was in the classroom before moving to Brock, and so she brings that expertise and that just that raw, I've been in the trenches and I get it, and I know it works because I've done it with my kids and my intermediate kids. So as I was, I'm reading some of the stuff going, yeah, you know what, I can see this works. It's practical and it's doable, and it's been written, and by someone who knows what it looks like in the classroom. And to sort of support that, another piece we put into it for each of the activities is what we call the ABCs of background knowledge and a vocabulary spotlight. And we didn't talk about where Sandra and I first met. Was working on some textbooks for the two Ontario elementary curriculums ago, I believe it was, and she was our literacy expert. And the stuff that she wrote in there was amazing and is like a hidden jewel that people still use to this day. And this kind of fits this, where it's a little piece of information, but it's so tightly connected to not only the language arts, but the science. So it talks about how do you activate, build, and connect on background knowledge. So for this activity, talking a little bit about static charge, and then going into the vocabulary. Well, what does static mean? How does that fit? When kids learn about static electricity, then the next thing they learn about is current electricity. And they go, wait a minute, it's electricity. They're both the same. It's that word static. And then they look and see from the Greek, it means causing to stand. So it doesn't move, right? So the connection then is about the difference in that one word. And that all of a sudden, now they can chunk static electricity and ideas with ideas around current electricity. So every single strategy has this nice little box in it that talks about the ABCs of background knowledge and vocabulary spotlight. So you have all that to kind of set you up. If you like, that's the teacher guide. It's got all the information. It's the details, not to the point of a script, but there's enough detail that you could go, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing here. I'm feeling, we know what's going on there. So with that, we're going to start this particular activity 14 with we're leading to what's called the visual word sort, and Sandra's going to walk us through that in a moment. But I'm just going to release a poll here. And this is just kind of your best guess, your best kind of thinking at this particular point that, and you may not have taught a static electricity or electricity before, kind of around the grade 6 area, if I remember correctly. It depends on your province, so that's going to change. But some of these words, you look at them, and you think, okay, would my kids, or if I was teaching kids in that sort of middle school, intermediate area, would they have heard these terms before? Would they have not? The poll is there. You can click as many as you like. It's more about trying to sort of think about, okay, what words would they maybe know or not really be familiar with within the context of electricity. So I'm sure they've heard of repel, but it might not be something to do with static electricity. So folks are starting to drop a few words in there. And we can see that, they're all science words, really, right? And so it's like, okay, well, that could mean something that to them it might not. And so here's our first step before we're doing an activity. We have to start to get them to think about the words, because how else are they going to be able to describe it and make some understanding of what they're doing and connect it to other concepts that we're doing. So thank you to those, and I suspect there's still a few people looking at that and adding to it, but that we're going to use that as part of our visual word sort. So I'm just going to jump us ahead to the next slide here. And in this visual word sort, this activity, I think, Sandra, is safe to say this falls under this will kind of be on the literacy side of things. And we've put a little video together, but with no audio over it. So it's about a minute long. I'm going to start the video, and then Sandra's just going to kind of walk us through what's going on there. Okay?
Okay, so the visual word sort is something that I would do with my class at the start of a lesson or a unit, just to gauge how much of the vocabulary for that particular science lesson or unit that students might be familiar with. So in the book itself, you'll have all these words that deal with static electricity and then suggestions for putting together a placemat, much like this one, with a few pictures that students can match the words to. And the idea is to select pictures that have the potential where students could put a few words there so that they're actually talking about the words. Now, we didn't have the students here talk about the words as they're placing them, but as a teacher, I would be walking around and listening in. Are there any misconceptions with certain words? Are there any words that they couldn't place because they had no knowledge of them? And then I'm able to use that and plan forward with that. So in literacy, we'd say we're front loading vocabulary, but I know in science, a lot of times science teachers will talk about not doing this at the beginning, but doing it after an experience like the science experience experiment that Lionel will share with us now.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that too is that in the research that we read is that there's something about, even if they don't know the words, it's flagging those words first of all. And I think by connecting, like you had connecting the words to the pictures, what it does is they might not know if it's right or wrong, but when they see or try to use that word again, they've got to connect a place to connect to. And we've got an activity that you'll bring us back to after the video that sort of reinforces that. But yeah, so if you've completed this piece, then the next thing would be is they could go on and they could do this short little activity that we call static action. So we'll just watch that little video so you can kind of get a sense of what's going on with that from the science perspective. In this activity, static action, we're going to do a fun activity with static electricity. But the key part of the literacy connection in this activity is vocabulary. Whether it's static electricity or some other concept in science, it's really important that kids are comfortable with using the science words and understanding what they are. That's part of building their background knowledge. And so while we're going to do a word sort with this activity, you could use it for any other activity where there might be a higher than maybe what we call normal use of vocabulary. So let's take a look at what we need and then we'll try it out. So for this activity, you're going to need a black piece of paper, a balloon, and a round balloon is best, and then some gelatin. So just the gelatin that you find in the supermarket, not the Jell-O flavored kind, but the actual just gelatin that's used as a thickening agent. And then with that, we can take our black piece of paper and just pour on a little bit of that gelatin. It doesn't need to be a lot, something sort of like that. And then what we're going to do is blow up the balloon and give that a go. And while I'm tightening that up, I'll let you know that we're going to put a static charge on this balloon, and most kids know how to do that by the time they get to you. And it's just simply, all I have to do is rub my hair and put a static charge on that. And then we're going to bring that static charge close to my gelatin and see what happens. And it's those observations that are going to lead to the vocabulary to explain what the kids are observing. So let's have a look, and then you can try this in your class. That's all static electricity, attracting neutral objects to charged objects.
It was very cool. You actually were able to capture the sound of the gelatin popping or standing. That's great. So then the final piece to supplement the word sort and the activity itself would be to have some kind of passage that students can read as an introduction to static electricity and static action. And anytime that we've done this, the amazing thing is that the words that kids just worked with in the word sort, they often say this, the words seem like they're bolded, even though the text is all the same font size, same style. Other kids have said, those words seem to jump off the page. So in terms of getting their attention, that front loading of the vocabulary really did the trick. And then the other piece that students report back when they're talking about what happened when they read this passage now is that they recognize that some of their choices were confirmed because the passage reinforces that they were correct in where they placed something. And then a few students will even admit that some of the ones that they weren't sure about or that they thought they knew were actually not correct. And so it's kind of a low stakes way of correcting misconceptions and just having them realize and pay a little bit more attention to, oh, you know what, I thought I knew that word, but I really don't. So I'm going to need to pay a little bit more attention to that. So back over to you, Lionel, I think, or anything else? No.
Yeah. We can go two ways here. I'm just sort of looking at the time here. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about your experiences and then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. So here we captured some of the responses that our teachers gave us when we've asked them at the end of a series of sessions on science and literacy together in terms of how their practices changed. So we started with another literacy strategy, of course, the I used to, but now I. And we asked them, what is something that you used to do or you used to think that you now recognize has changed? And you can see a lot of different responses there from, the hands-on doing of science. We did very little of it before. Now we do a lot more of it. To keeping subjects separate, but now I know how to integrate and I have a way that works for the integration and gives the integration real purpose and reason. And also a dependence on, following a textbook page by page and just reading to really emphasizing those thinking skills like the observing and the analyzing and really working through the strategies to help kids organize their thoughts. And then, as we've kind of alluded to throughout the webinar tonight, the first 2 years of the pandemic, I was back in a grade 8 classroom. And it was probably, a highlight of my whole teaching career in that it gave me a chance to really try out for myself all the things that teachers were saying, hey, you know what, guys, this really works. And this is what else we did, and this is what else happened. I definitely had taught grade 8 before, and I could have done what I had done before, but I really felt the need to really experiment with the science and literacy together and see where else I could bring it to, and also see for myself how students reacted. And so you can see from my students' comments here, the engagement was definitely there. Their interest in science was there. Their enthusiasm for actually doing science and the way we did it, and having science be something that we did both in language and science time was an adventure for them. They hadn't spent that much time in science. So we regained some of that valuable time to make sure that we had time to do more than just reading science by bringing some of those literacy pieces into the language arts block. So, for me, that was a really affirming experience. And it really, I think you can see from the students' comments there, lived up to our title of fail safe, because students felt safe to fail. they would try something and know that we would work on it and we would find ways to analyze what had happened and then work on it some more. And they really appreciated that. So that was kind of a nice climax to all our work on science and literacy together. And I know that made a big difference for me. And Lionel, I know that the science consultant, when we first started our project together, and you came on with us, often talked about, a little bit of concern is knowing your background, all the work you had done in high school physics and on the Pan Canadian team to work out a framework for all the science curriculums across Canada and all the richness of your experiences. We were so honored to have you with us, but we just were always a little concerned, would he stay with us? At what point might he say, maybe this is going a different way than I thought. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your realization around the power of the integration of the two areas.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, right? And I think people think, oh, you can't integrate those two. You can't do those two together. There seems to be this belief or this natural fallout. Well, it's science and math. If we're going to do something, we're going to do science and math together. And yet, I think I mentioned it earlier. You go back to that word communicate. It's one thing to know something about science, but you need to be able to communicate that. And there's so many jobs that ability to communicate your understanding is critical. And communication, the easiest way to get to that is through literacy and language arts. And so I think that's why it's so simple. It's so easy. I remember talking to a teacher before our time, and she was working on her master's. And back then, the model was more the wheel, thematic, and you had a wheel and you had language arts in the center, and then all your other subjects were kind of around there. And her master's was to put science in the center. And she said, I don't know why I didn't do this earlier. Everything else, that's the natural world. I use what my strengths are, language arts, but it's all through the lens of science. And she had a master's, time to do all of that. I think what we've done is tried to make it just a little more practical and a little more easy, and kind of, to find those aha moments in there that, yeah, we are really, when you're doing science, you're doing language arts. And there's so many places in language arts where you can be doing science, even if it's through the thinking routines. And so, yeah, it's a great fit. We've done a workshop. What is it? Better Together, I think. Was that the
Yeah.
title? Yeah, better together. They're fine on their own, but they're better together. And so I guess that would be sort of my sense of coming at it from the science perspective. To the point where, I think when we started doing this, we kind of had a vision for our book, and maybe it's a bit lofty, but that's what visions are supposed to be. And I think I speak for both of us here. I always have to be careful with that. But this idea that we think the 25 activities we have in there that are connected to the 5 thinking routines, it's our vision that every middle school intermediate teacher could be comfortable doing those. I think that their practice would be better. There's more opportunities for their kids to be engaged. And yeah, there's a little bit of learning that would be coming on our side as the educator, but there's also a whole bunch of learning that's coming on from the student side. So that's our vision. That's what we're working towards. For folks that were here today, we hope you see the vision and are interested to continue with us on this journey of looking at, well, how do we bring literacy into science, and how do we bring science into literacy? And so we're very appreciative of you spending the time here today, and thank you for joining us. If you are interested in our book, there's the cover right there. You can go to Pembroke Publishers and find us there. I'm just going to put an offer out right now to folks. that will, if you're interested, you can click on that button right there that says take me there and use the code FSS23 on any purchase at Pembroke. And you'll be able to get $5 off on your next purchase. So something to add to your professional library if you're interested. I'm also just sharing our handout, which is in the tab next to the poll. It has the thinking routines that Sandra talked about today. It has the static action information that we talked about directly from the book. And we've also included the reading that Sandra had put together there that ties in with that the kids would read after. So just a few offers there for folks. We hope that you can take advantage of that as well. And just before I leave, the final goodbye to Sandra to say goodbye for us, just our contact info. We would love to hear from you. We are building out our website, the failsafestrategies.com. It will have the playlist for all the videos, so you can have a look at them there if while you're waiting for your book to arrive. We're also on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can find us at ThinkFailSafe or both our personal accounts as well. And we've been using the hashtag FailSafeStrategies. And I shouldn't say we, Sandra's been our leader in this area. I'm behind. That's what we've been using of kind of finding each other there on X. And there's our email addresses as well there too. So Sandra, maybe I'll just leave the last sort of comments to you and just say again, thanks to everyone. It's great to have seen you virtually for the last hour, and hopefully over the next few months to years, school year, we'll cross paths and you'll be able to say, hey, Lionel, Sandra, we saw you on the webinar. We'd love to have a chat with you there as well too. So Sandra, I'll pass it over to you to say good night.
Sure. Thanks, Lionel. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. I know it's above and beyond normal workday, but we really appreciate having the opportunity to share the work that we've been so passionate about for so many years. And you know, we're so thrilled to be able to have found a way to put it into something that's very practical and usable. I know that we were always called the practical consultants, so here we are again in a very practical way, trying to support teachers in their journey as they look for ways to help kids make sense of the world around them and use those literacy skills in all the ways that they need in their everyday lives. So please do reach out to us via any of the ways that Lionel has posted there for contact information. Love to hear what you think about the book when you get a chance to read it. And with that, good night to everybody.
Night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Night.